This one I really love. It is called Monsters in Love. Monsters in Love. Good song. Can't play it. Anyway, Resmaa Menakem is the author of this book. Resmaa Menakem is also a author of a book called My Grandmother's Hands. So if anyone has heard of that one, I would say that's his more well-known book. This is a newer book than that. My Grandmother's Hands is a somatic abolitionism approach to racial healing, and Resmaa Menakem talks a lot about different kinds of racial trauma based off of the kind of body that you are in. So mine being a white body, he talks about like white bodies and bodies of culture and the difference in the racial trauma that we've experienced intergenerationally. So he talks about this idea of intergenerational trauma, which I also don't know how familiar folks are with that. There's another book that I have on one of my bookshelves by Dr. Joy DeGroy, and it's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she talks a lot about this idea of intergenerational trauma as well, and how things that happen to our ancestors or to, our grandparents' previous lineages actually do impact the DNA that is handed down to us. And they have seen, even in animal studies, that when an animal experiences a trauma related to a certain stimuli, even their offspring will be afraid of that stimuli, even though their offspring never actually had a traumatic experience with that. So it's really fascinating. And so you can imagine then take that to think about the trauma that was experienced by both, by everybody with the genocidal mania that was the beginning of the United States. And so Resmaa Menakem is very much in the mindset that we can only do racial healing by also being in touch with what's happening in our bodies, and that we have to be aware of and able to ride our emotional as well as physiological feelings in order to combat the impacts of white supremacy and racial trauma in our country, especially, our country being the United States, but racial trauma has occurred all over the world, but I can only speak as an American that the trauma regarding race that's been impacted on generations throughout American history is just the one that I'm most familiar with. So anyway, that is not what this book is about. Woo, coming back to Monsters in Love. Resmaa Menakem is also a therapist. He's a licensed clinical social worker. He also has an honorary doctorate from my alma mater, California Institute of Integral Studies. Very cool place. But anyway, so in Monsters in Love, this book is a couples therapy book, basically, and he talks about what it's like working with couples and how in monogamous romantic relationships, some of our most wounded parts come up, and that we turn into monsters in relationships, and that he repeats over and over again in the book that when things are really heating up and getting really intense in our relationships, that nothing is going wrong, right? He says that over and over again, and that actually that's what's supposed to happen in romantic relationships, monogamous romantic relationships. So I will say, if you're somebody who is coming from more the polyamory perspective, you probably wouldn't love this book, because this book is like very monogamy focused and very focused on what comes up in the context of a monogamous relationship, and how when you're in a monogamous relationship, or like when you kind of move into like next steps of commitment with one other person, their flaws really come to the surface, and things that you might not want to be committed to, you see a lot more clearly, and you're like, okay, like, do I really want to be in this? Whereas like, I think he argues that with like polyamory, you're kind of maybe like letting out the exhaust or like the tension in a way by maybe getting your needs met in other places in the relationship. So yeah, I mean, if you are somebody who is polyamorous and has read Monsters in Love, I'd be really curious to hear what your take on it is. I have a feeling that there's probably a lot of pushback against it. Not that I've really heard about it, because again, Reza Menken's pretty powerful thinker, and I do think a lot of his points are still really valid in like different things that he brings up in terms of what couples do to each other. He talks about this like concept of sliming. I wonder if I can find it. Here's something that, so he talks about the 5 anchors as being really important in working through what comes up when you're in a conflict with your romantic partner. And he says that you need to, 1, soothe and resource yourself, 2, quiet your mind, calm your heart, and settle your body. So soothe and resource yourself. He goes into more detail about what these things are, but I also think that a lot of these points are really things that have to be practiced and kind of thought about what individually works for you, right? So whatever like soothe and resource yourself means for you, like know thyself is also, I think, really important in this context. Number 2, pause, then notice and discern the sensations, vibrations, and emotions in your body instead of reacting to them. I'll say that again. Pause, then notice and discern the sensations, vibrations, and emotions in your body instead of reacting to them. So I think that number 2 actually could be really important in doing number 1. So I kind of, as we go on, you'll see, I think some of these things it's not necessarily like a linear 1, 2, 3 process, but it can be kind of a like maybe trying to do all these things at one time. Number 3, accept and tolerate the discomfort instead of trying to flee from it. Accept and tolerate the discomfort instead of trying to flee from it. Ooh, easier said than done. Yeah, doggy does not like that. Who wants to accept and tolerate discomfort, right? No, nobody wants to do that. Number 4, stay present and in your body as you move through the unfolding experience with all its ambiguity and uncertainty, and respond from the best parts of yourself. Yeah, I love that. He talks about that too, this idea of like, when you're responding to your partner, try to respond to them from the best parts of yourself rather than the weakest parts of yourself, which is really hard to do, right? When you're in a romantic relationship, when you were like in the thick of it, you were like, ooh, your most wounded parts come out. And so I think it's a good reminder to say like, respond from the best parts of yourself, right? Because romantic relationships are also like, I really like to think of them as spiritual work. And again, this is like in the context of monogamous relationships. Not that polyamorous relationships cannot be spiritual work. Indeed, they are. I just tend to think of polyamorous relationships as like kind of the ideal. This is also making me think of a book that I really like that I have on my bookshelf somewhere. It's called The Ethical Slut. Very cool book. I highly Number 5, metabolize any energy that remains. Okay, so soothe and resource yourself. Pause, then notice and discern the sensations, vibrations, and emotions in your body. Pause, discern. Accept and tolerate the discomfort. Stay present and in your body. Metabolize energy that remains. So these are the 5 anchor points, and these this is also, as you can probably now see, it's very tied to somatic abolitionism work, right? Because I think these 5 anchor points are also pretty much the same thing that Reza Menken would suggest that you do in My Grandmother's Hands if you're having a difficult racial conversation, or even a conversation where race is in the mix at all, right? Because race can get us so activated in our bodies. I don't know if you felt that, especially as a white person. So anyway, this is, I think, a really, really helpful book. If you are somebody who works with couples as a therapist, or if you are in a couple, if you are in a monogamous couple, I think really helpful book either way. And so anyway, this is, I think, a really, really helpful book. If you are somebody who works with couples as a therapist, or if you are in a couple, if you are in a monogamous couple, I think really helpful book.